Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Jonathan Fessenden. He is a former head of information security, so he has quite a few thoughts, I think, on hiring in the information security field. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on your career thus far?
Sure. I got my first position at actually a federal agency, the FDIC. A friend of mine gave me a chance. So that was an interesting way into cybersecurity. Was one of those here, I'm going to give you a chance and see what you can do. And that was really based on kind of character in the past of being tenacious, learning anything, and being a smart, curious person. From there, I went to NASA, had my name in a database of at Dell from applying, and Dell picked me up for a contract at NASA. To a brief stunt at Ernst & Young after that, discovered I didn't love consulting so much. And then I landed what I think would be a dream job for me today was at VMware. It was a great place to work as the lead of their information security operations for the North and South America time zones. Right after that, I went to Q2 in Austin, Texas. The next stop was a brief stop at SentinelOne as their lead of MDR for this time zone again. And then where I was at last was InfoSight, which is an EDR company starting an MDR. They had been acquired by Data when I started, but by the time I had actually started, it was acquired by Kaseya. So last role was head of information security at Kaseya. Moved on up to that role just under the CISO.
Very cool. So obviously we talk a lot about the talent gap in the industry on this show. In your experience, having worked in these various roles, would you say that the talent gap is a real thing? And if so, what do you think it looks like?
Yeah, there's, I don't think there's ever a clear answer to any of these existential questions, but I would say that there is plenty of talent out there if you're willing to, grab hold of them, take the chance, maybe even plan ahead. It's hard to do in cybersecurity. It seems like we're always in the middle of something or playing catch up, especially with funding. But if you're able to grab somebody fresh and train them up, that's a fantastic place. And yes, there's a lot of debate. Is an entry level role. I would argue that having IT experience is pretty essential. However, think about, I just used this example the other day, the U.S. Army. Think about what we entrust those soldiers, sailors, airmen, et cetera, with protecting our nation. They do some pretty sophisticated things. And I'm not sure what the percentage is, but I'd venture to bet that well over 70% have just come out of high school with no skills to speak of. And the military, U.S. military and others, spend the time to train, to build the program, to walk them through, to have check gates, to have mentors, et cetera. So the talent gap, I guess, exists if you're looking for somebody that already has the 10 years of experience level to come in and save you. If you're looking for someone to save you, you're not going to find it outside your gates, right? You've got to build it. So I would say no, there's not a talent gap if you're willing to put in the work. There's a talent gap if you're looking for people that already have the solutions and the experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if you were to consider that, at least as of recently, as of September 5th, we're recording this on the 25th, Stefan Waldenvogel he's been tracking data on cybersecurity jobs. And as of September 5th, it was only 15,000 cybersecurity jobs with cybersecurity as the search word. So if you figure 15,000 cybersecurity jobs roughly, you could probably figure some of those are duplicate postings or fake or whatever you want to call it. So maybe the number's a little bit less than that. I would say there's probably at least 50,000 people trying to break into the industry right now. Maybe 100,000, maybe more. It's kind of hard to get a solid number on that. But if you look at the number of open jobs versus the number of people that want the jobs, there's enough people. There's just not enough of a way to get all those folks that want the jobs, the senior jobs, or even the entry-level jobs. They're being realistic, I think, in a lot of cases, and you're trying to, quote unquote, break into the industry and get their first foot in the door. But there's the common pushback I hear is, we in our particular situation, we just don't have the budget, we don't have the time, we don't have the man hours, basically, or women hours to train these people. It's going to take 6 or 12 or 15 months before they're going to be actually contributing at a decent level, and we have to be careful about the information that we entrust these folks with. I'm kind of the opinion that yes, for certain roles in security, they're not entry level roles. They can't be. I would say that pen tester is probably a good example of that. You can hire junior pen testers, but to be a truly effective pen tester, you really need to understand technology on a pretty deep level to be good at what you do. And then there's a lot of intangibles that factor into that, like outside the box thinking, critical thinking, stuff like that. But I think there are some tasks that you could probably delegate to somebody entry level, whether it's just documenting things or pulling a lot of the grunt work off of the plates of the people that have the experience. So what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. And you made a great point about the number of job postings versus the number of people trying to break in. I hadn't really thought of that recently, at least. But you do see posts about people receiving hundreds or thousands of applications for especially entry-level roles. So I also agree with you on, you don't walk into a cybersecurity role. I had a terrible analogy. I can't think of a better one right now. But I point out that astronauts, many of them are pilots, but doesn't mean that because you got your pilot's license, you go become an astronaut. You get your tens of thousands of hours up in different airframes, and then you still try out on it. So some of those roles are just more advanced. And I don't know that anyone's taken the time to rank them. And that's a great example of penetration testing. The damage you can do on accident if you don't understand the technology you're working with is tremendous. But you also made a great point around, your entry-level folks, you could teach them how to use Nmap safely, right? And just do a light scan, get that out of the way for us, et cetera. So I do think there's a role, but as we were saying earlier, in the middle of the firefight or when you already need the resources is a little late. And we all know this, but we've got to push a little more on leadership, probably C-suite and above, to plan ahead before you need it. The famous saying, the time to plan is not after the fact. So getting people in the pipeline and talking to your help desk teams, your support teams, your others, and build that pipeline is something I've had success doing at some of the companies I've been with. Build the relationships so they don't feel like you're stealing them. And they're already familiar with your technology, your institutional knowledge. They've got relationships. There's all of those, but they're also technologists. By the time you get there, get them to your seat. So the learning curve isn't as steep. So I think that's your pipeline, not necessarily on LinkedIn or Indeed. Your pipeline, right? You try to hire entry level from within is probably the best approach in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. At which point then we have to be able to, as an industry, point people to those entry level jobs to get them started in the right area of the pipeline. I think a lot of folks are coming in out of a boot camp or degree program, and they're just expecting to jump into a security job. And if there simply aren't that many security jobs, they need to be able to get some technology experience somewhere. The challenge with that is, I think, mismanaged expectations. So folks are thinking, hey, I'm going to make $100K after I get whatever piece of paper. and that's just not a reality on the ground, especially, it's a simple idea of supply and demand, really. If there's tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people trying to break into the industry, that's obviously going to decrease the amount that people are going to be paid for those roles. I feel like almost sometimes there's a sense of entitlement. Like, I went through this degree program, I put in the effort, now it's my time to shine. But I think the folks that grew up in security, quote unquote, who came up through IT and maybe had a couple decades of IT experience, and then before security was even a thing, they were doing security stuff, and then they just kind of fell into it almost. They have the sense that, hey, people got to come up the way I did to be truly effective at their role. Do you kind of fall in that camp, or?
No. I understand the perspective of they got to come up the way I did, but even that's funny because we just talked about critical thinking, contextual thinking skills, and the folks that are kind of stuck in that mindset probably need to be a little more open about, well, someone can get to the same destination without taking your journey. However, I think we're all agreeing here that you need to learn technologies. Like I can't teach you about a common application in real time when it's too late, like when we need to be dealing with a threat or cleanup in this, or learn how to penetration test it. So there's some expectation there. I agree on that. I did want to go back and touch on something. That sense of entitlement, I think, is being built in by. I don't want to blame marketing, et cetera, but the sales machine and some of these higher end or for extreme profit educational programs. I don't want to name names, but one locally advertises, in I think it's 16 weeks or something, become a cybersecurity expert and make, and then they give the average salary, which is setting that expectation that they have no other perspective unless they have a cyber mentor or something. They're kind of thinking that that's how that works. So I've called them out a few times on LinkedIn. You got to stop. This doesn't exist. But I do think it's awesome. There's companies like TCM Security is one of the favorite that comes top of mind is giving you a little more practical hands-on so that you can prove something. As hiring managers, something we should probably be looking at is doing practical exercises, right? For people to get in there and do you actually know how to do some of these things? That would give you some of those skills and make you a little more useful and get you in the right mindset. So kudos to them for also not being extremely crazy in pricing and setting outrageous expectations on salary, but just giving you some hands-on.
Yep, totally agree. And I know some of the folks over at TCM, great people as well. What about if you were to open up an entry-level job, maybe pick your discipline or subdiscipline of security of choice, be it GRC or SOC analyst or something like that? Because there's probably going to be a lot of job seekers listening to this as well. For whatever job you pick, could you think of like the basic sets of skills that they would absolutely need to have for you to consider them for a role like that?
Sure, I can give it a stab off the cuff here. Let's see. Well, I read a book that helps me with this a little bit, and I cannot remember exactly, but it's a Patrick Lencioni book. Great series that he writes, several of them. But he said, look for humble, hungry, and smart. So I'm looking for humble, hungry, smart, and then a friend of mine, Josh, has said intrinsically curious also. So tinkerers and mechanically inclined folks. That's the soft skills that everyone. I don't know whether it's downgraded, but in my book, those are the harder to. You can't teach those, right? Those are things that people need to have, and then if they have those, you can teach them technologies. But I would hope that someone has dug into their operating system. I would love it if someone has began trying to log things, then centrally log them. I would like it if someone had done some tinkering and came to me and could share a story so I could see their excitement about what it was they were learning and digging into. Required things for a SOC, I would love it if someone knew, pick the logging platform, Splunk, Elastic, whatever. If they'd done some of the free, a lot of it's free, out there trainings, could come and say, hey, I looked up the job description, or I got good at Splunk. Is that similar to, your elk stack? That would be good enough for me. But showing some initiative on that. So I do think a SIM, having some familiarity with a SIM, I do think the Security Plus is fantastic because it covers so many basic things around business, GRC, and then a little bit into operations. I think I'm just looking for someone that's really tried and got broad breadth, especially in GRC and the SOC, because you're going to be exposed to the whole thing. You won't be doing the whole thing, but you'll be exposed to all of it. You need to be able to speak those languages. So I don't think I have specifics, but I am looking for curious, you've put hands-on, you've gotten familiar with some of the main technologies. Can you explain the difference between antivirus, EDR, next-gen AD? Have those concepts down, and then be familiar with the SIM guy.
That's great. Yeah. A lot of folks I talk to, it's interesting you mentioned soft skills first. A lot of hiring managers I talk to on this podcast, that's usually the first thing they mention as well. And I think oftentimes it's pretty difficult to evaluate soft skills, or at least on the front end, when, say, a recruiter is looking through a resume and you're tasking that person with, well, all right, only send me the best people that make it through whatever screening you do. And, you may get hundreds or thousands of applicants, tens of thousands in some cases for certain roles that you post online. Any thoughts on the front end, whittling down that massive number to a digestible amount to actually interview? Like, what would you use as criteria or give to your recruiter to use as criteria weed out the folks that probably aren't going to be a fit?
I don't, Pete. Off the top, I don't. I think I need to look through my notes here for a moment, but I don't. That has been, it's remained a struggle. I've had the good fortune of having recruiters that brought great folks. I'm not sure exactly what their keys were, but one of mine at Q2, she was fantastic at understanding the culture fit. He brought us candidates that would, and she would mention me, hard charger, but he's right there with you. Like, he's going to have high expectations. However, he's going to help you get there. It's ruling. I told her to use the term gut wrenching. I don't know if I told her actually, but I would use it. There's times when it's gut wrenching. But gut check that person. Are you cool with, there's going to be a 70-hour weekend here, every other month. Are you okay with that? And while I don't support the idea of those long hours and just, ripping everything you can out of somebody, that is what's going to happen when you get here. So I think it's the conversational gut check that's probably picking the right candidates that are okay with that work environment. I've mentioned in interviews that, I do my best. I do everything I can to make sure that your family doesn't fire me. However, you're going to need to do your part to prep them for these are the requirements when we have an incident. We really can't stop. Do you have a way to help account for that? If not, maybe security operations isn't your thing. Maybe it's this over here, and it's engineering. It's a more standard hour role. But when I get to them, it's generally after they've vetted. I'm not sure exactly what my recruiters definitely happen. Thankfully,
yeah. So there's a point that we could identify maybe for improvement for future hiring. I think it's super important for hiring managers to have a very close relationship with their recruiter, truly understand, what they're screening for. Basically you want to make sure that they're not weeding out people that could be a fit. And maybe you just passed up the best possible person because they didn't have, a certain keyword on their resume or something like that. But yeah, you mentioned sort of the setting expectations, which I'm always, harping about, that it's such an important thing in the interview process. You want somebody who's going to stick around. And one way to do that is present them with the good, the bad, and the ugly. As a part of my recruiting training in the very beginning, they told us to, quote unquote, make it real for candidates, where basically you would give them almost kind of like a day in the life, or show them the uglier parts of the job, and really see how they react to you presenting them with that information. And if they take it in stride, they're like, yeah, that's tough, but I totally get it in context of what this job entails, blah, blah, blah. Then that there's a good chance they're going to, stick around long term and not leave at the first sign of stress or, difficulty, that sort of thing. It's not a perfect science. You can't always determine if somebody's going to stick around long term, but you can do your due diligence at least to make sure that, that you presented that. But sometimes you get the opposite problem where the interview is all negative, and then you turn every candidate off, and then they have no interest in proceeding further in the process. It's even worse. I've had this happen where somebody would meet with the founder of a company, and that was the last call, and it was just the final gut check. And that founder was too busy or checking their phone or actively almost seemed like wanting to turn the candidate off of the company, which I never understand, what the strategy is behind that. If your whole team is invested that much time in that person in that interview process. I know you've had some thoughts on stuff like this.
Yes.
Any stories you could share?
Well, I think stories get I may not be great enough at keeping them gray to keep away from a specific story. Don't want to throw anyone under the bus here, but I've had those myself. I've seen some of my colleagues, even some of my leadership, do that. Maybe even when it's kind of a couple steps out of maybe their lane, just to give that, hey, this is really hard to the candidate, and I'm with you. I think that, as evidenced by some of the folks that have reached out to me and never worked for me, just from the interviews alone, we've kept in contact and made connections all over the place. And your ability to, leader's ability to inspire somebody. You can present the truth. You can present again, I'm going to go back to the military. Hey, we're going to go charge that hill. If you have a leader that's not inspiring, that people don't trust and understand, and it takes time to build trust, but you can do that by being open and authentic initially and giving them examples. But you ask them to charge a hill, after the fifth hill, they're like, why? There's nothing on the other side. It's failed 100 times. But if you say, let's charge that hill, and they already trust you, they're like, okay, well, we're charging the hill because there's a good reason. He fights for us every time. They're going to follow you, right? It's shown by good retention, your ability to recruit and inspire people in that moment when you're describing that, hey, half of us are going to, be taken out of the hill. It's going to suck. But they're like, let's go, right? I believe in the mission. I believe in you. I think you're going to do everything you can to protect us. And you're right there with us, right? You're not back in your comfy chair. So I think that scare piece, you can do that if it's the truth. I don't think embellishment helps for a check or a test, but you also need to have the ability to inspire that person to want to do that. That's good leadership. So for those of us that have been in those interviews and been scared off by it, maybe it's a good litmus test. Maybe that's not a great leader. Maybe that's one you don't want to work for because tone at the top really matters. It trickles on down. But I would say it's probably a gift when someone does that. It's maybe a red flag if they're not able to also inspire you to want to be there and tell you how they're going to help and how they've overcome the challenges, and et cetera.
Yeah, interviewing is definitely a two-way street, and especially when you talk about interviewing really senior people that have a bunch of options, even in a market like this where there's a lot more candidates than normal, there's certain skill sets that these folks are always going to have 4 or 5 offers at once. So I've always been a huge advocate of selling your company and your position to the candidate, regardless of what level it is or how many people you're interviewing. You have to give them some reason to work there. And even more so, like I said, if they have multiple offers. Sometimes I'll hear, well, they should just know why we're great, or, they should be interested in us, but don't necessarily provide a reason. And I think everybody needs a reason, especially when they're, interviewing multiple places. It's going to be the company that has the most streamlined process and that makes the best impression that gets the best people. So that's a direction we could go in, I suppose, a streamlined process.
I do want to touch on something before we move from that, though, is I, as hiring manager, I'd love it when a candidate does know about our company, has done some research, knows a lot about the business, knows why they can contribute something to it. That is helpful. But I'm not sure if that's just flattery or on my part, but I love the effort and I love the understanding. I think right now, especially, it's unreasonable to expect a candidate to do that unless you're, step 2 or 3 in that interview. Then I think it's reasonable because there's folks having to put out hundreds of applications to get a screening call even, or just past that. So I do think it's unreasonable. And I'm going to call out FANG companies. They're often like this, and they give you these long study sheets to get up on all their values, and they're probably worth learning. I'm not saying they're bad values, but that's a heavy weight when someone's just trying to land a job that you want them to get so familiar with your company for what if they're not going to land it, right? They're not getting CPEs for this. So maybe calm down.
Yeah. And sometimes too, I think the companies that have the greatest employer brands or basically the most weight to throw around, sometimes they'll kind of take advantage of that and put people through more paces and interview rounds and studies and, stuff like that. What are your thoughts on the sometimes used practice of putting people through case study or questionnaire, stuff like that? Because that seems to come up pretty often for me.
It does. And I know some of the companies that you're talking about. I having taken some of them, I enjoy it. I enjoy an opportunity to demonstrate. Whereas if you have an interviewer that's asking questions about the thing that they know and you don't answer it correctly, they come away sometimes with an impression of, well, this person doesn't know what they're doing. I think those case studies sometimes will give you a little more breadth and opportunity to demonstrate. Or if we're looking for some of those intangibles or soft skills, some of that can be sussed out by the personality tests they keep. I've seen IQ, I've seen personality, I've seen situational, use case ones where you walk through. So I like those. They do take up time. I don't think they're one you should do right up front, maybe. I know from the company's perspective, it's a vetting process right up front and keeps you from wasting more of their time. From a candidate's perspective, that's a lot of investment when they're trying to put out several, applications, especially if they're already employed or they're in school. It's a big time commitment. So I don't have a solution. I would say I like them. I'm in favor of them. And the companies where we've hired on, and for some reason, sometimes our HR teams allow or don't. I don't understand why some do and don't. But when we can give a practical examination to kind of get an idea of their skill set, I enjoy doing that for myself. I have better luck with the candidates, being a good fit, I should say.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I totally agree that if you are going to do something like that, it should be towards the later rounds. And I guess we could kind of talk about number of interview rounds as well. But I think a candidate has to have a good reason to want to work for you before they decide to make the extra time commitment to, do some sort of case study or practical or something. They're going to be much more willing to do that if they're super excited about the company. They've met the hiring manager or one of the team members, and they're like, oh, wow, I'm really going to enjoy working with this person. They've already talked to the recruiters and they know the benefits are great. That sort of thing goes a long way. And especially too, getting people all the way through the process. If you start somebody with a case study very early on in the process, yes, you might weed some people out that aren't a fit for your company, but you might also weed some people out that are a great fit for your company, and they just didn't know enough about the company to want to continue on in that process. And I've seen that actively happen with a DFIR firm I worked with back in the day. So I have pretty strong opinions on that. What about interview rounds? Like, in your mind, is there a perfect number of interview rounds and process? Like, have you thought about that at all?
I have. I want to call out VMware for having a great process. I remember they flew me out. It was end to end. I think I had one call screening with the recruiter, one with somebody on the technical staff, and then I showed up, and there were several of us, and they popped us in and out of rooms. And we actually they came to us. We stayed in the room, and they would cycle through. And by the time we left, they said, you'll have an idea of whether we're moving forward or not by the time we left. And they weren't kidding. That was a great experience. I'll call out Q2 as well. Very similar. By the time I walked out the door to go grab an Uber, they'd walked out and said, hey, this is what we want to do. So immediate feedback all at once, knock it out and make it the company's burden. Make it easier on the candidate, I think. Right? You're already employed. You're the one seeking the talent. Make it on you. Block off a day on everyone's schedule. I think that's easier to get everyone together and then rip a bunch of candidates through. I'm sure there's some disadvantages to that, such as scheduling, and maybe getting a batch might take enough time that you lose some of those candidates. I'm not sure about that, but I do love the approach of all at once, where the candidate feels important. You're coming to them and asking them the questions type thing. That was great. Both of those experiences were similar, and I enjoyed them and loved those companies. They were great companies. They really put their employees first and the communities first too. So some shared values from those companies.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it sounds to me you remember all of this very clearly because it had sort of a wow factor to you. And I think oftentimes in interview processes, it becomes just that. It's just a process. It's just something we need to do and get people through, when, really it's an opportunity to showcase what's great about the company and provide that wow factor. And I think when folks have that wow factor, they're more likely to stick around for the long term, even though it's just a one point in time thing. When I started a campus recruiting program, because one of the partners of the firm had done this when he went through college and was recruited out of campus, we would bring in all the recruits from all the interview rounds from campus, and we would all do a big dinner, and we would get to see how people interacted with partners and other candidates, and you really got a sense of their social skills and stuff like that. And then it was a nice fancy dinner. So for the candidates, they had that wow factor. That's something that they'll never forget. And I would say, for a lot of companies, that probably isn't practical to do with those junior level folks, but especially for senior level folks, and especially if you're hiring for multiple roles and you have a big batch of candidates, if there's a way that you can streamline everything, and keep your costs relatively low. Even a tour of the office, I think, is a nice touch. It doesn't have to be super expensive beyond the airfare. So yeah, that's a great point.
I agree. In that book by Patrick Lencioni, actually takes a candidate to lunch, and they have something set up with the server to bring the wrong meal intentionally. They want to see the reaction. And they're interviewing for an executive, but they want to see the reaction. Are they kind? Are they understanding? Do they try to understand the problem? Or are they, it does tell a lot. So I really like that. That's a good point.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Who was it that did those interviews at dinner? You remember? It came up.
I don't.
Yes. No worries.
I don't remember, but.
What about challenges that you've encountered throughout your time hiring over the years? Are there any challenges that were recurring for you and that you continue to see or be aware of?
Yes. So the salary negotiation piece with your HR business partner from the company's side, if you're the hiring manager, can be quite a challenge. I've even seen people suggest that the comp team and recruiting team be information security specialized, right? Like within the company, and kind of asking for that to be its own field. I don't know. I do think that HR teams can handle that. Comp teams can handle that. It's just another silo for them to consider. But the technology companies I've been a part of in the past kind of whitewash them across all of information security. And they would always cite, I think it's Radford or somebody, and it's not the reality on the ground. Like, I don't know if that data is 6 months old or what, but unless you've got that brand cachet or a member on the team that candidate really wants to work for, or a technology that your company has that no one else has, maybe you've invented it, maybe you're just, there's got to be something really exciting if you're going to pay, what's market 6 months ago when that data came out. I'm not sure, but salary has always been a struggle, offering the correct amount. To be competitive, I should say. Another was, the speed of the interview process. Back to the question you'd asked earlier, when you can kind of accelerate that and make a decision. If a company's indecisive, that's another indicator, right? What are you waiting for? This isn't Tinder. You're not going to swipe and find another one. They just you matched, go on the date, right? Like, if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. Be honest and open with your candidate when they're there. Give them constant feedback. They're not going to be surprised if it's not a fit, right? It's okay. And you can refer them on and help them get the next position if that's the case. But I'm getting off topic here. The salary, the slowness of the hiring process sometimes isn't in your wheelhouse. It sometimes can be dependent on your colleagues. But those are two things. From the candidate's perspectives, no, I don't think I noticed any frequently occurring issues. It was mostly on the side of the business. Those were the struggles. I've met a lot of great candidates. And again, I have had great recruiters. So that's probably part of it.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear, at least for sure. On the compensation piece, I think that's a pretty common issue, especially in an economy kind of like we're in today. I think there's a lot of companies looking to do more with less, hiring freezes, stuff like that. So budgets are constricting, and there's just not enough or as much latitude to do what some security hiring managers may actually want to do, in which case, fair enough. If you can't get the money, you can't get the money. But at that point, you need to flex something else. If, the people that you're going after, if they're at a certain market salary and you can't pay that salary, yes, you could get lucky and find somebody that's maybe asking for less and they don't know what the market is. So you could get them for less. But as soon as they talk to a friend and that friend lets them know what their market value really is, they're gone. And then all of a sudden you need to backfill a role. So I'm always an advocate for flexing on experience requirements and being flexible where you can if the salary is not something that you can flex on. Can you ever think of a situation where you did that and ended up hiring somebody good?
The closest I can come to that would be an internship program that just paid off in spades. You would meet some folks that would get the chance to demonstrate it at a decent pay wage, that was way under market because it's internship, and then you get the chance to offer them that role. That's really exciting and cool. But no, I haven't gotten lucky and just had somebody that didn't realize that they were a diamond, right? That just fell into it. Typically, again, they're not only applying to you. You're probably not the only offer, and they probably already talked to folks, but it is maddening I've been there to get in and understand that you just accepted 30, 40 grand less than you probably should have. And now you make the case to your leadership or whatever, and they're truly hands are tied. Like, once you're in, it is much harder to get those raises, promotions, etc. So advice in the middle of this unsolicited advice is when you start, you need to be okay with the salary you got. because you're probably going to find out someone got more, or you just need to be okay with it and accept that that's fine for you and your situation, your family, because you're always going to be, wishing there was more. So anyway, no, I do think there's a couple of considerations on behalf of the companies to take into consideration ahead of time. Is look at MGM, recent story. How much did that cost them per day? And that's some simple GRC math right there. That's simple risk math, annual rate of occurrence, annual loss expectancy, et cetera. And then decide, go back to your HR departments or whoever aren't maybe giving you the money and try to start making those discussions. Like, hey, if we aren't ahead of this, this could be the case. I hate using FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but this is, at least it has some math to it. That it could cost us a lot if we're understaffed, under-equipped. I realize that one probably wasn't caused by staffing. It's a long stretch of a connection. But if you are hiring folks based on the budget that was just handed to you, and that budget wasn't based on any addressing risk, it's just kind of an arbitrary number. It needs to be based on something. So if your leadership is okay with you trying to hire world-class talent at $60,000, and you can't get it, that's a risk they've decided to accept ahead of time. And then you will need to go grab an intern or fresh entry level. And that now means the other $40,000 that's missing from that salary or whatever needs to be spent on training, or get two candidates at that price. So that maybe you can have almost the output of one experienced candidate and then train them up. But there's no getting away from paying for the business expense of having an analyst or engineer that's productive. Tangent. Sorry, Pete.
No, that's great. I think one sort of bugaboo of mine, and there's some intricacies here that we could discuss, but oftentimes the yardstick for individual ability is often years of experience. It's something that bugs me to no end. So I know that there is some utility in having years of experience. Like time in seat does matter, but it's not necessarily a perfect measure of somebody's ability or potential. So what are your thoughts on using that particular metric as a yardstick? And, is it complete? And if not, what do we use instead when evaluating folks?
I'm with you. So we align a lot. I do think that it's worth putting out there, right? Because you can kind of get an estimate of or give an idea of what you're looking for to the candidate. However, you got to be careful not to scare off candidates that are very bright or have done a lot. Like, your years of experience don't measure the amount of time you spent at home. You might be the 9 to 5 checkout, and you're big on family. You're big on a different kind of balance in your life. And then there's the folks that, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. The family folk might actually not burn out as quick, right? Or you that's all you do. Like, your downtime is building labs. Show me that in the experience, metric there. Another one to consider is terrible, but IQ or EQ. You have a bright person, let's say it's 150 IQ. That literally means they get 50% more out of every year than an average person at 100 IQ. So that, 10 years is now worth 15 for that person, but not for the average candidate you're looking for. So I would say both the candidates, don't let that discourage you. If there's a decent recruiting team or hiring manager, they're going to understand. So go ahead and apply for that role. Don't be disappointed if they don't pick you up, if you don't get feedback on why, but go ahead and apply. You'll have some more, I don't know how to phrase this, but some brighter recruiting teams that'll understand that. And then on the hiring side, maybe put an asterisk on there. I've seen PayPal, I've seen a couple of companies do that where they say, hey, Renata actually, I think is part of the reason they put it in their job description. She's big on imposter syndrome. Don't feel like you have imposter syndrome. Some even say, hey, if you don't meet all the qualifications, that's okay, apply. Like, we're looking for somebody that has most of these or can learn these, not all of them. So kudos to those companies that do that and the hiring managers that do that. But I think it's, to your point, decent to throw out there as a metric to filter out. If you have 1 year experience, you're not probably going to make the 10 years when they're looking for 10 years. But if you're at 7, maybe 6, maybe try it.
Yeah, that's why I'm a huge fan in job descriptions of having more descriptive bullet points versus must have 2 years of experience in this tool, 3 years of experience in this discipline, because it doesn't necessarily speak to somebody's ability in those areas. Like, you could easily rewrite that, and instead of 2 years of experience with Splunk, you could say looking for intermediate understanding of Splunk or expert level understanding of Splunk. And then you don't disqualify somebody who doesn't have the years of experience, but they'll learn very, very fast. Or same thing, like I worked with a lot of consulting firms over the years. They usually assign these, must have 7 years of experience in consulting doing SOC 2 audits, or managing SOC 2 audits, because they're looking for a senior manager. Well, what about that person that was promoted 4 times in 2 years and they only have 5 years of experience? You've just disqualified that person who's actually a stronger fit than the people with more years of experience because they got promoted faster. So I think that's a big driver of the talent gap is companies not understanding those intricacies and nuances, and not being as open-minded as perhaps they could be, and trusting recruiters. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. I'd like to think I have a pretty good idea of when I talk to somebody that's truly exceptional, but maybe it doesn't show it on their resume. You have to be able to trust the recruiter you're working with when they highly recommend somebody, but on paper they don't look like a great fit. At least talk to that person. Obviously that person's been working for you for a while and they understand your personality and what you expect in somebody, I would say. So
I have had good luck with that. I finally do have a story. The last company, we talked to a gentleman. On paper, I was like, no way, right? This doesn't make sense. What he's applying for and what his experience level was, why would he want this role? And I'm glad I don't. Wow. Absolutely. And we didn't have a long crossover before I departed my last company, but in that short time, I learned from him. Amazing. So yeah, and that was all based on a recruiter. Like, you want to talk to this person. And I was like, this doesn't make sense, but okay. Right. And did it. And we hired him. It was a no brainer, hands down. Everyone was like, get him. And we moved quickly, but I agree with that. What are your thoughts on degree requirements?
Yeah, I think that's kind of old guard way of hiring. I think in certain areas it makes sense. Like if you're the government and you have to require a degree for X contract, that makes sense. But in most positions in the private sector, there's so many people out there today that are self-taught and that they've consumed so much information. They basically have multiple degrees worth of knowledge, but they didn't necessarily, get the piece of paper along with it. Same thing with certifications. I'll talk to so many candidates that don't have that piece of paper, and I'll present them to a client. The client will come back and say, hey, no, they really need to have their CISA. I'll be like, you don't understand. He's been doing these exact audits for consulting firms for 10 years, and he's extremely talented. I can tell just by talking to him, but they won't talk to him. So again, trust your recruiters, but that's kind of where I land on it. How about you?
I'm in the same place, and I'm really disappointed in the federal government for continuing to do that. I sure it had a place in a time, I suppose. And for the contractors filling the federal government roles, especially federal, but government roles, they have to meet a requirement. So they're going to make those a hard condition. But they're in both cases missing a lot of candidates. And it looks like DHS is flexing a little bit. I personally applied for some roles a little while back, and they do multiple examinations, proctored, et cetera, lots of practical exercises. And they even say in some of those, apply anyway, right? If you're close, and I'm sure that your pay, might be what gets dinged, might knock you down. But I am disappointed in that. I did see also recently one of the big four lowered their bar. A while back, while I was at Ernst & Young, they lowered their bar for analysts. Like, you didn't have to have a degree, but you couldn't make manager unless you had a degree. And I think they're looking for some badge of professionalism, right? You got a bachelor's, so therefore you are professional type thing to present to their clients. It's about image. That's really, I think, what all certifications and degrees, at least in our industry, are. You do learn a lot. I've learned a lot. I'm not saying they're not valuable, but I think it's just a quick way for them to say this is a professional and check a box to present to their client. It's important when images, the image, when it's about image or it's about that contractual requirement. But I think that's bananas. The practical test when you hire somebody tells you what you need to know.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's a sales and marketing thing. Like many of the consulting firms that I'll work with, they'll have these certification requirements, just because they have to be able to sell to their clients. They have to benchmark their professionalism or ability somehow. And if they're able to say, well, we have this laundry list of certifications for all of our auditors, then they can at least use that as a selling point. But it doesn't necessarily speak to I don't think the professionalism. Like, yeah, you could make the argument that on average, maybe people with a degree are more professional than people that don't have a degree. I'd like to see some data on that. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but I truly believe in looking at everybody as an individual. And there's so many things that can be compensated for that piece of paper that you just can't have a sweeping rule on, in my mind, where, you have to give people a chance and you have to really understand who they are as a person and what they bring to the table. And you don't always get that by using letters behind somebody's name. So, yeah, I think we're in alignment there.
We are. And I will say one thing that's never accounted for in any of that is, has someone faced adversity? This is not going to be popular comment, but like, did someone grow up poor? Did they have to struggle? That person tends to be, in my experience, someone that just can gut it out. And it's not always the case, right? It obviously goes both ways, but I love someone that's faced some sort of adversity. You don't always know it. Sometimes you discover it later. And these are all anecdotal. I don't have comparison. I haven't kept any stats on that, but it does seem that they'll go through it. And you can't measure that with a degree, a certification, or practical examination. There's still more to a candidate. So probably important to remember everyone's a human. And if you can inspire them, they will rise to that occasion. They will want to be good. They will work in their off time. If you are a good leader and can point to a good mission, or if your company's got a great mission, they're probably going to be more inspired to work hard to be who you're looking for. They'll grow into it.
Yeah, and going back to your point from earlier about leadership, I think some of the best hiring managers I've met over the years have that mentality that they need to be in the boat with their people rowing as well.
Yes.
To get them towards that goal that they're going for. I've had managers in the past. I worked for a large corporate staffing firm. It was a grind. Every day was a grind. We had awful jobs to work on. We had to make a ton of outbound calls. It was all about our metrics. It was super stressful. Every day we talked about our numbers, but we had a really good manager, and we wanted to slay dragons for that manager because he sat us down every day.
Exactly.
When it was time to talk about our numbers and be like, look, I know you don't have the jobs. I know we're asking a lot of you, but this is what I need to have you guys do. And yeah, we would do anything for him, and we worked harder because of it. So yeah, that can't be undervalued. I don't think that ability to get in the trenches with folks and like you mentioned, the whole grit and overcoming adversity thing is a great thing. I think if you can to somehow measure in an interview process, because if your job is super high stress and they're going to be put through the ringer, if there's a case study from their past where you're able to point to that, say, okay, so they've done something similar before. I mean, it could be as simple as somebody worked as a line cook, and they had to juggle competing priorities and work at a super fast pace and stuff like that. They don't necessarily have to have been on an incident response team before,
right?
But, so those transferable skills. Can you think of any other sort of transferable skills that you might look for?
Well, I'll group them all together and say veterans. I think that's especially wartime veterans, but you can't just exclude it, to wartime veterans. But if you've gone through those, the whole idea behind at least some of the branches, I'm not going to rip on the other ones, but it's to put you through that stress, make you think of multiple things. And many of the, special units will get you days without sleep and food, and then at the end give you an exam and have to do some business logic and it just it's not a pass fail necessarily, but it's to put you in those situations and say, like, okay, now at the end of this, you're not going to get a break before you have to think. Now go. If you can hire those folks, I mean, they've already been through that, and they're hard to get. For one, I think a lot of people want veterans, but especially some of those special unit veterans, they've really been through it. But I think you'll end up when people are like, oh, it's an Army Ranger, but they don't know anything about cyber. Like, oh man, here you go again, right? Trust me, they'll learn it, right? Give them the objective, tell them the why, and they'll figure this out. But no, I do like veterans, but I haven't specifically targeted them. Not recently, at least. My recruiters have picked up on my preferences there and done so on my behalf.
Yeah, and I could imagine too, veterans are probably really good about respecting hierarchies and authority and chain of command and stuff like that.
Process, procedure.
Yep.
order of operations.
Which is another intangible I think that most people don't talk about looking for in an interview process, especially I think with the changing generations in the workforce. As the boomers retire and Gen X and millennials were coming to the fore, and then we have Gen Z and the generation behind them coming up. We all have different ways of approaching work. And I think boomers especially are more used to traditional hierarchies than even millennials and especially Gen Z. So, being able to maybe understand the strengths and weaknesses of the different generations might be helpful moving forward as well. But if you've identified somebody that's, been through that ringer before or had to report to that authoritarian before, they're going to be used to any sort of hierarchy, I guess you could throw at them.
Do we want to touch on the generational pieces? That's a fun topic.
Sure. Yeah. We got probably a few more minutes here. So absolutely.
I just had thoughts on many organizations we're flat, right? There's no rank. You watch, I might misquote, but I think it's, Facebook's, maybe some Google's where everyone has their role. They don't really report to somebody. I appreciate that in many ways because it's to a large degree how I've run my teams, and that I'll explain to them. Everyone says I work for you, and that's true. Your leaders should work for you. Just understand that everyone has their own responsibility. So your leaders just delivering certain things to their boss or the board or whoever, and that's the difference. So therefore, they have to ask you for certain things about what you've done, or they have to get to a certain destination. They have their goal, and you are the tool set and team that helps them get there. So they get to pick that direction. They just have different responsibilities and roles. They aren't better, right? That shouldn't be, in my opinion, how it's looked at. You should be working with a leader, not for a leader necessarily. Although, it's pedantic, but a flat organization to me does not mean that there aren't people that ultimately answer a question. It's just they have different roles and therefore get to make certain decisions because they're accountable for them. They're the ones responsible for it. I think that's what was meant by that movement toward a flat organization. But I think in many ways, you'll have I've experienced some engineers, especially like DevOps scenarios where they don't want to be told by anybody, they just give me the goal and leave me alone. It's like, well, there's more to this. There's a reason they're bugging you and asking. There's a reason they need that metric. There's a reason they need to put something specifically in Jira, and they really want to get out of your way. They don't want to come bug you and ask you. They have to deliver on that. You can have a conversation about how to best do it, how to do it easier. But I've had some pushback myself from folks that just want to do this and work. But everyone's got to realize we all want to do that. We all want to just get our job done and deliver a quality product. You got to do it together, though. You are dependent on each other. There's no way around that. But anyway, the lost thread. I have feelings. It doesn't even go here.
That's great. No, and that kind of goes back to our talk about leadership from earlier. I think a good leader is able to tell their team, okay, I'm in the boat with you. We're all rowing in the same direction. Here's my directive. Here's why we need to do this. And I need you guys to help me get to that goal. It's a collaborative effort, but at the end of the day, I'm the one that has the responsibility, and you guys need to help me get to that, future goal.
And that leader has to prove that, right? Like when bad stuff happens, they need to be standing up to their boss and saying, that was me. And I've often shared with my leadership, and I'm not even going to filter it. I've just said, you won't know their name. You're going to have to fire me, and then you're going to have to find out their name because I'm not giving you their name. It doesn't matter. It was my responsibility if my team messed up, or if we achieved something great, you'll know their name. Or this team and it was this person. But if it was a mess up, that's always me. That's the leader's job, just to eat crap and explain how they're going to fail forward, what we did to correct it, what we already changed, how we're going to detect it in the future. You go through the whole process of how we're going to fail forward. And as a leader, you're not supposed to, but you get to take the blame for everything. And hopefully you're not sharing names. You don't point fingers. Doesn't matter. This team, and that was my failure because I didn't put in place a certain process, procedure, whatever. I'm going to go fix that. I'm going to make sure it's done by next week. But anyhow, so if you can get out there and prove that to your team, they will believe you and trust you and row with you. You can't just jump in the boat and be like, we got to get there. They're like, great. Why? You give the why, but also they got to want to row for you. So maybe you got to stand up and charge into battle and take a few for them, and then you've got a team that'll follow you.
It reminds me of a quote too. I forget who said it, but it was praise publicly, criticize privately. I think that is super important as a leader. You don't want to publicly talk crap about your employees as you're trying to get them to do something. It seems like common sense, but I've seen it play out the opposite way. So yeah, it's another good.
There's also something to be said for correcting in real time. Like when a bad behavior is being observed, you can't have the passive bystander, right? Like as the lead, you're like, hey, I don't think we're going to do it that way, right? Or this is, wait, maybe we should approach it this way. But you're right. You don't call out the person. You call out the activity or the behavior and try to not make it about them. Agreed.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great place to wrap up. Just one last question for you, Jonathan, that we ask everybody. What are we not talking about in the field, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Wow. It's starting to be talked about, so I can't say it's not, but the in-house training, the accounting for time for people to do that. If your utilization is supposed to be 70%, that darn well better include at least 10% training. And if you think about cybersecurity, that training is keeping up with the latest threats. And then you've got to advance. I had a CIO, Lucic, at Q2. He would draw this arc and show how to keep up, you've got to keep up with that arc. Never mind, if you want to get ahead of that or get promoted or be in advance, it's the same thing for knowledge. You've got to work harder. So that 10% is just keeping up with the latest threats and taking those apart and understanding how that impacts your job, your customers, your environment. To get even further along, we've got to block out time to train folks. That said, if you're ambitious and you want promoted or to move on, you are probably going to need to put in the time on your own time as well. But we're not talking enough about how to bring people from an entry level, which again, I would say is with technology experience, entry level to security. Stop trying to hire them. You just give up. Like you've got to start trying to train them after they've joined your organization. You're not going to hire your way out of it. You need to train your way out of it.
Yep. And it's a longer term focus for sure, which goes back to the idea of proactive hiring and a long-term focus and building a program around these things versus just kind of throwing bodies at the problem in a reactive way. But yeah, that's a great point, Jonathan, and appreciate your time. Folks want to find you online. What's the best way to do so?
LinkedIn, /SINEEAR, Sign through. Bye.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your time, Jonathan, and thanks everybody.